Hello everyone, let's get started. I just want to quickly go over the February past community news. There's a Facebook Live meeting happening. Looks like might be every month, and there's a 30-minute Facebook Live session that you guys can attend, and there'll be one expert from the past community presenting. Also, the Past Career Center is available at past.org/careers, where you can post and view jobs and also view the resumes. Here's some upcoming virtual group webinars. Several different past virtual groups available as well. These are the upcoming SQL Saturdays in the US, in Europe, and Latin America. Also, if you guys are already registered on pass.org, but also please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Our speaking today, we have Eugene, who's a BI consultant. He's been working for SQL Server for about 6 years now, certified in querying and administrating SQL Server 2012. He helps run the Pittsburgh Power BI user group and is also a Pluralsight author. Eugene, I'll make you presenter and let you start.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, you ever see the slides all right?
Yep.
Perfect. So let's get started. All right, well, hi everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. I'm really excited to be able to talk about Power BI deployment and how you scale from 5 to 5,000 users. Now, I want to be clear that this is not a talk about architecture or performance or anything like that. It's just about the different myriad ways that you can deploy Power BI and how some of those make sense where you're just sharing with a couple of teammates and how some of those make sense whenever you're sharing with the whole wide world. And so it's more about covering all the different ways that you can deploy Power BI and how there's kind of this gradient between whether you're dealing with 5 users or 5,000. So just bear that in mind. We're not going to be talking about performance or anything like that. Real quick about me, Jason already introduced me and covered a lot of these things. The thing that I think is most important here is the going from SQL Noob to SQL Pro. So 6 years ago, I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know what a stored procedure was, I didn't know what a view was, and I didn't know what a function was in terms of a database. And over time, I got involved with the user groups and SQL Saturdays, and I grew through presenting. And so I really encourage all of you to consider presenting. The virtual user groups and the real life user groups are always looking for speakers. So please definitely do consider that. So let's jump into the presentation. So the question is, why do we want to talk about deployment methods? Why talk about this? Is a little bit of a dry subject, and there's two main reasons. So the first one is that it keeps changing. The number of changes since literally a year ago have been incredibly drastic when we talk about Power BI. So we had a thing called group workspaces, which were kind of upgraded into group workspaces 2.0 and rebranded as apps. Power BI Embedded was completely redone in terms of the licensing model. Before, Power BI Embedded was a thing that kind of lived in Azure, and you paid per render. And it just wasn't really ideal because it was a completely different user interface for managing that. And as an ISV, if you were using Power BI Embedded, you didn't have a great idea of how much you were going to be paying every single month. So it was a consumption model that really didn't make a lot of sense. That's been changed to a capacity model, which we'll talk about. Organizational content packs are a way of deploying Power BI reports, and those have been deprecated. So they're not dead yet. They still have one good use, but they've arguably been replaced by apps in most situations. And then finally, Power BI Premium and Power BI On-Prem were added last year as well. Oh, wait, they announced report sharing literally yesterday. It's been available since January, but in one of the recent blog posts at the Power BI blog, they covered some of the updates to January, and report sharing was one of them, as well as the fact that embedding into SharePoint went to general availability, went out of preview. It was announced for that yesterday as well. So literally, after I had put together all the slides, I noticed the updates this morning, and I had to go back and make some changes because of everything that's going on. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk about deployment methods. Is it's been confusing at times because it's still settling in. I think at this point, a lot of the kind of surface area of deployment options has settled and has stabilized, but the perimeter is still kind of shifting, right? I'm expecting a lot of new features to be coming out for on-prem and premium and some of these other things. So expect it to continue to change. The other thing is just that it can be a bit confusing because as we're going to see, there's 8 or 9 different ways that you can deploy these reports, and it's not always clear what makes the most sense. So we're going to try and organize it in a logical kind of hierarchy based on how many people that you're trying to share your reports with. There's other ways to look at it, but that's the way that we're going to approach it. So what are the ways to deploy Power BI reports? Well, like I said, there's a lot, and it can be a bit confusing, but this is kind of the order that we're going to run through. So we're going to start with the simplest way, which is dashboard sharing, which is literally you create a report, you publish it, you make a dashboard, you hit share. And it's ideal for sharing with just a couple people. Now, let's say that you need to collaborate with those people. Well, sharing stuff off of your personal workspace isn't ideal, but you're able to create shared workspaces, which are containers for dashboards, reports, and data sets. And it allows people to collaborate on reports and share them that way. And it's not necessarily ideal when you need kind of the canonical one source of truth, because unless you make it a read-only workspace, anyone who's in there can make changes. Next, we're going to briefly talk about organizational content packs. Like I said, those are deprecated. They're still completely supported, but I expect that as they add more functionality to apps, that organizational content packs are going to die off. We've got apps, which we'll go into detail. Those are kind of the de facto way for sharing Power BI reports throughout your entire organization. So more than just people on your team. SharePoint embedding is just a simple way to embed specific reports into SharePoint pages, which can be useful if you have people who don't really want to go to powerbi.com, especially if you have strong support for SharePoint within your organization. And then finally, as we kind of broaden our reach, we get to 3 of the more eclectic kind of ways of deploying Power BI reports, and that for most of you, you're not going to really be touching these, truth be told. So there's Power BI Premium, and this is for when either you have a huge user base, so I'm talking about at least 500 users just to break even, or you need high performance or high capacity or something like that. There's Publish to Web, which is for sharing with the entire world, but the problem is that you make all of your data public. So you really have to be careful about that. And then Power BI Embedded is designed for custom applications, and it can be a way to share with the broader world for sure, or with your customers in particular, but it takes a lot of work to implement, so it may not make a lot of sense for you. So we're going to go through each of these in more detail, but I just wanted to cover this is what we're going to go through, and this is kind of the spectrum that we're going to be looking at, going from sharing with just a couple people to sharing with a bunch of people. So another way that we're going to look at this throughout the presentation is this inverted pyramid. And so the idea is that we're going to start with, okay, I've got a team. I just want to share reports with them. How do I do that? And then the next layer up is going to be, how do I share with all of the Power BI users within my company? And as we go up, how do I share with everyone? How do I deploy out to everyone in the organization as a whole? And then finally, how do I deploy out to the public? And so we're going to make reference to this diagram as we go through, just to remind you where we are in this kind of inverted pyramid as we work our way up and out. One other thing to think about when you're thinking about this and how you want to deploy your Power BI reports is, are you leaning towards more of a self-service model or an IT governance organizational BI model? So the trade-off here is that self-service is quick and easy, But like anything that's quick and easy, it's often messy and not particularly organized. And so if you're just making a bunch of reports and you're just putting them in your personal workspace, which we'll talk about, and just sharing them out from there, well, what happens whenever you leave the organization and now people need to maintain those reports? Well, they're going to have to keep your Windows account or your Azure Active Directory account online and log into there and make changes there. It's not necessarily ideal, right? But if we go to the other extreme, things like Power BI Premium, those support, a much more of a centralized control and a bigger audience and all that kind of stuff. But it's very expensive, and there's some work that's involved with getting that set up. So what you're going to find is that these smaller methods are ideal for self-service, but the moment that you need a bigger audience, you're going to want to have more control over what's going out to that audience. I mean, you think about it, a lot of people do regular reports in Excel files and that sort of thing. And whenever it's just on your desktop, it's fine to have, accounting reports 1, accounting reports 2, accounting reports final 3, just this kind of mess. But if it's something that's going out and say some sort of quarterly report to the entire company, you can't have accounting reports final test 3 or something like that, right? So there's this tension that's going to be going on anytime you're figuring out your enterprise deployment plan. And so that's just something to be aware of as we walk through this. So that all being said, let's start at the very bottom of this inverted pyramid. Let's start with a situation where I just want to share with 5 people, right? Just the people on my team. I'm not worried about this canonical single source of truth kind of model. I'm not worried about QA or staging. I made some cool proof of concept reports and I want to share them with the team, whether maybe I'm on the management team or maybe I'm working with a team of other BI developers and we want to collaborate on some of those reports or something like that. So no matter what you do, you're going to have to do publishing, right? So you write a report, and then at the top of the menu bar in Power BI Desktop is going to be this big publish button. And whenever you hit publish, it's going to ask you which workspace do you want to publish it to. And so there's my workspace, which is kind of like my documents, and then you can create other workspaces. And workspaces are going to be tied to Office 365 groups. And basically, they're folders. You can think of them as containers for dashboards, reports, and data sets. And so it's just a way of organizing these artifacts that are created by this authoring process. And so for 90% of the scenarios that you're going to run into, you're going to have to hit this publish button, and it's going to go into a workspace somewhere. And a lot of these are, what do you do once it's there? There's some exceptions, but by and large, that's what we're going to be dealing with. So the simplest and quickest way to share a report is to share a dashboard. Now, up until literally last month, this used to be the only simple way to share from a workspace, a personal workspace, because you couldn't just share reports. You had to make a dashboard, and then you had to pin one of your reports to that dashboard and then share the dashboard, which was a little bit clunky. But like I said, Power BI is changing so rapidly that literally last month they added the ability to share individual reports. And yesterday on their blog, they announced that in one of the feature recaps. But generally for a long time, dashboard sharing was the way to do it. Whenever you do share a dashboard, there's 3 levels of permission. There's owner, which is you. There's read permission, and then there's read and share permission, where basically you can decide, do I want to allow other people to continue to propagate this dashboard out, or do I want to kind of keep a better lock on it? So this is the quickest and easiest way to do any kind of deployment per se. Publish to your own personal workspace, and you just hit the share button and you pick a user to share with. And it'll show up under their My Shared section. Now, this is a good example of the self-service end of things, right? It's really quick and easy. You don't need to talk to Bob in IT to get this all set up. It's really a snap. But again, if you've got stuff that's being reported out to maybe auditors, or is talking about financials, or is going out to the entire organization, you really don't want to lean on this for a couple reasons. One, like I said, if you change jobs and you're publishing this to your own personal workspace, well, now the company's in a bit of a bind because they want to close your account, your Azure Active Directory account, your Office 365 account, so that you no longer have access to this stuff, but they still need to keep it open so the reports are still accessible. And there's no QA process. It's just, hey, I hit share, this is out there now. So it's not ideal. It's not ideal for scaling up, right? But this is a good starting point. This is the very, very bottom of that inverted pyramid. So let's say we want to step one level above. Well, what we can do is use something called a shared workspace. And so, like I said, you can create workspaces. So you've got your own personal one, and then you've got other ones you can create. And these are based off of Office 365 groups. So behind the scenes, when you make a workspace, you're making an Office 365 group. On the roadmap long-term is the ability to disassociate it from Office 365 groups. But right now, today, that isn't there. Whenever you do this, whenever you share a workspace, it's going to give users access to anything that's in there. So it's going to give them access to dashboards, reports, and data sets. So again, a workspace is basically just a folder for all of the information. And so anything that's in that workspace, whoever has access, whoever is given permission has access to it. Again, think of it like a folder on the C drive or something like that. So you've got My Workspace, which is like my documents, and then maybe you've got a folder just like you would in OneDrive or on your C drive that you're sharing with other people. And with a shared workspace, there's two different levels of permission. There's admins and there's members, and that's basically it. That can be a little bit of a problem whenever we get to apps, and we'll talk more about that. But one of the things you can do is you can have a read-only workspace. And so what that means is that only admins can make any actual changes, and members are just basically given permission to view what's there. So those are the two ways that if you're just sharing with your team, that's going to work fine. So let's say we're working our way up, and now we want to share with, say, 50 users instead of 5 users. How do we share with basically anyone who's licensed with Power BI? So maybe not the entire organization, but everyone who's comfortable going on to powerbi.com. So for a while, one of the best ways to do it was organizational content packs. So the organizational content packs was basically a way of taking your reports and wrapping them up with a nice little bow and say, here you go. And this was ideal for sharing canonical official reports throughout the organization, but now it's deprecated. And the reason it's deprecated has been replaced by apps, and we'll be talking about those next. But basically, you really want to get away from using organizational content packs. Apps can do almost everything that content packs can do. The one thing that they haven't really solved yet is the fact that organizational content packs were really, really good for templating. And what I mean by that is sometimes you might have power users who want to be able to customize reports. So they want to be able to take a data set and make some of their own reports. And organizational content packs are a good way to do that, because what happens is whenever you create an organizational content pack and someone loads it into their workspace, they basically get a copy of everything. And so they can make changes or even make new reports without making any changes to the original. So it was a way to make a template and then pass that on to the user. At least today with apps, you can't do that. You basically have this single source of truth, this canonical source of truth. In a more regulated environment, that's great, right? So if you're under regular auditing, and so it's important that any financial reports are previewed and controlled and all that sort of thing, then apps are great. But again, if you have some power users and you just want to give them some self-service capabilities, organizational content packs can be a little bit better. So just going back to the beginning of this presentation, as we go up and out, we find that we lose some of that self-service capability. So talking about apps, a Power BI app is basically a shared workspace plus some publishing capabilities and a little bit of a wrapper in terms that you can give it, you can give it an icon, you can give it a color, you can specify a landing page if you want that to be a specific report or something like that. But I don't know how I feel about the term app, right? Because to me, whenever I think of an app of some sort, I think of interactivity, right? And so even though you do have some filtering capabilities and some interactivity capabilities when we talk about um, Power BI apps, it doesn't really fit what I normally would think of it. That's a little bit different if you were to include, say, a Power App custom visual, so you can actually write back to the data or something like that. But this is what they've decided to call it, for better or for worse. And so this is officially a replacement for group workspaces, which was kind of the predecessor to apps, and for organizational content packs. And one thing you'll notice is that anytime you create a shared workspace, you're actually creating an app workspace. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about with the shared workspace piece applies to this as well. Now, what are the benefits of dealing with Power BI apps? So one of the biggest things is having a staging process and a QA process. Because before, if you just share a workspace, then whatever's there is there. And if you make a report that's incomplete, then anyone who has access can just see it and say, well, these numbers aren't right. And there's nothing worse than being in the middle of the report and working on it, and you want to save it, and then someone from accounting says, hey, this doesn't match up, and you say, well, no, I know, I'm still working on it. With apps, you can say, okay, we're going to hit the publish button, and we're going to push everything out. And they recently, I want to say in the last couple months, probably I think November or December, they added support for selective publishing. So now you can say, you know what, this report isn't quite baked yet, let's not push it out. But Power BI Apps is pretty much the canonical method for sharing with all the Power BI users in the organization. If you want to reach everyone who's licensed with Power BI, this is kind of the de facto way to do it. So definitely look into these as a way of publishing official reports, whereas sharing a dashboard is more something that you created and you want to share with somebody. Currently, the way you actually do the sharing is you hit publish, but then you give them the URL. There's also a way to search for apps, but in the future, they're going to be adding the ability to kind of push out content. Right now, that push capability just isn't there. So apps, if you want to share it with everyone that goes to powerbi.com, apps are the way to do it. Now, let's say that we want to go just a little bit higher, a little bit further out, right? So now we're in a position where we want to be able to share with the entire organization. So everyone in the company, how do we do that? How do we support that? So now we're saying, you know what, we don't necessarily want to ask everyone to go to powerbi.com, or we're saying, you know what, we need a different licensing model, because once you start to hit 500 users, that gets expensive, because it's $10 per month per user for a pro license. And so as a result of that, when you're talking about 500 users, you're talking about $5,000 per month. That's some real walking around money whenever you start to get to this level. So one of the best options for sharing with that many users is Power BI Premium, because at 500 users is where it starts to make financial sense to switch over to Power BI Premium. So Power BI Premium, the lowest level for the P SKUs, the P1, P2, P3, that sort of thing, and we'll talk about the different stock keeping unit SKUs. But for the main premium ones, they start at $5,000 per month. And what's interesting is that this was added last year, and you are licensing capacity, not users, right? So if you have reports that have that little diamond by it, you can see over on the right, there's an image from the documentation from Microsoft. If you have a workspace that has that little diamond by it, then anyone can view those reports. Anyone in your organization can view those reports for free. And so when you have a large organization where you have a lot of low interactivity, low engagement users, maybe people who only viewing a report once a month, once a quarter, something like that, Power BI Premium can make a lot of sense, because now basically you're paying for virtual machines in Azure behind the scenes to run Power BI for you. Some other use cases, so if you have a lot of users, it makes sense. If you have large data sets, it makes sense. If we're talking about gigs of data, or if you have high performance needs, then it can also be ideal. For most of you, though, Power BI Premium just isn't going to make sense. Again, until you start hitting 500 potential users, it's just so much cheaper to license per user. So in many ways, it's not about deployment per se, it's more about licensing. but it's really worth mentioning because it looks like it's a different deployment method. But the user experience for Power BI Premium is literally the same. You still go to powerbi.com. It's still the same user interface. The only difference is that for these workspaces, now you can put that little diamond by it saying, this is expensive. This is a high-powered workspace, and we're going to make sure it's paid for by capacity, not by user. That's the only real difference. All of your deployment strategy, all of the steps you have to take are going to be exactly the same. So nothing's going to change there. Another way that you want to share, you might want to share with the broader organization is if you embed it in SharePoint. Again, maybe you don't want, maybe your users don't want to go into powerbi.com, but you want to be able to share with everybody. And so what you can do is use the Power BI web part. So basically what you would do is you would make a new SharePoint page, and then you would say, I want to add a web part, and like over on the right, you would pick Power BI. And then when you do that, you're going to have to give it the report URL. And you can get that from the user interface. If you go to File and then SharePoint, it'll give you the URL. You can just take the URL from the report, but you embed it that way. You get a couple options for whether like the filter pane's there, what aspect ratio, that sort of thing. But it's basically just embedded in SharePoint. Now, one of the key things to understand with this is how you're going to deal with licensing. So the thing about licensing is if you embed into SharePoint, you're either going to need Power BI Pro, which is again $10 per month per user. So anyone who goes on there, if they don't have Pro, it's going to say, well, you need to be licensed. Or you're going to have to use Premium. Now, this is where things start to get more complicated. For Power BI Premium, there's 3 different levels of the product for Power BI Premium. There's the P level, there's the EM level, and then there's the A level. And we'll talk about all those. The P level we just talked about. So that's for, okay, I want everyone to go onto powerbi.com. I want all of the functionality that powerbi.com gives me. And I just want to make it so that I'm paying for capacity. Now, the problem is that that's really expensive. Again, we're talking $5,000 per month. Well, there's a level below that called the EM level. So we can see here. And for that, you're going to be paying anywhere from about $600 a month to $2,500 a month. And with that, you get 300 to 1,200 renders per hour. And so if you pay for the EM level of Power BI Premium, then what happens is when you embed these reports into SharePoint, then anyone in the organization can view those without having to pay extra. So that's a good way if, again, you've got 500 users or 1,000 potential users and you lean very heavily on SharePoint today, then you can go that route. So there are a couple different ways depending on the size of your user base. Like I said, this yesterday it was announced that this is now general availability. This is no longer in preview. And so you can start depending on this today. Again, this was available back in, this left preview back in January. It's been available in preview for a number of months now. But this is another way to reach a bit of a broader audience, like we said. So the third way that you can reach your entire organization is Power BI Report Server. Now, personally, I would not recommend this unless you have data regulation concerns, unless there's some reason that you have to keep your data on premises, because the problem is that right now Power BI Report Server is very limited and it's very expensive. So again, unless you have a very specific need, it just doesn't make sense. Now, Power BI Report Server, underneath the hood is basically SSRS 2016 or 2017, whatever, what have you. And so what they did is they just added support for rendering Power BI reports. You don't get any of the dashboard support. You don't get scheduled refresh, although that should be coming at some point soon. You don't get any of the fancy like QA features where you ask a question and it creates a visual. You don't get Cortana, and you're forced to use a static version of Power BI Desktop. So normally Power BI Desktop is updated every single month, and you get new features every single month. Well, if Microsoft were to ask enterprise IT admins to update Power BI report server every single month, they'd be ripping their hair out. That is just not the speed of enterprise, and it can be hard enough to get people to patch their environments whenever we're talking about a security risk, much less some new functionality, right? It just doesn't happen. And so instead, you've got this quarterly release cadence when it comes to Power BI report server. And so as a result, you also have this quarterly report cadence or quarterly update cadence when we're talking about Power BI Desktop that's optimized for report server. So there's a special version that you use when you're writing reports for report server and you're deploying there. The nice thing is it's still compatible with the service, right? So maybe you don't have the latest features, but you can publish to both endpoints, so to speak. So that is one thing that's nice. But again, underneath the hood, you're basically installing SSRS, and the user interface is pretty much the same, right? So, but instead of clicking on an SSRS report, you might be able to click on a Power BI desktop file and you get the reports. That's basically how it works. Like I said, it's very, very expensive. Again, you really do not want to be using this unless you have a very specific need in terms of data sovereignty, data integrity, that sort of thing. Because you're either going to have Power BI Premium, which we said for the P-level SKUs, you're starting at $5,000 per month. And basically what happens is for every virtual core that you've licensed through Power BI Premium, which I want to say starts at 8 cores, but I forget, you're getting licenses for the on-premise cores for Power BI Report Server. Alternatively, you can have Enterprise Edition for SQL and Software Assurance, which if you haven't looked at Enterprise Edition is really, really, really expensive. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars for a single core, right? So those are the two ways to get Power BI report server. Now, it can be a way to deploy the organization and reach hundreds or thousands of people potentially, but just from a user interface perspective, I'm a lot happier with the sharing and deployment story of PowerBI.com, the Power BI service. But this is an option to be aware of. So we've talked about these rising levels of this inverted pyramid. We've worked our way up. So we started with 5 people, you share with your team, and then 50, maybe that's everyone who goes to PowerBI.com, and then 500, that's the entire organization. Well, what happens whenever I want to share outside of my organization? Now, if you're just sharing with a couple customers or a couple clients or a couple individuals, then really what you want to do is stick to the previous methods that we talked about, and then use something called Azure Active Directory B2B. So there's a white paper on how to use that. But basically, it's a way that your Azure Active Directory can talk to their Azure Active Directory. And so as a result, you can invite external users. Now, it's a little bit outside of the scope of this presentation, but we are going to have a link to where you can find some of these white papers. So if it's just a couple people outside the organization, then use the previous methods. Okay, it's going to be pretty much the same there. What we're talking about now is if you want to share with either the public or potentially you're developing an application and you're reaching hundreds or thousands of users. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So we've got 2 options in this category. The first one is publish to web. So it's free to use. Basically, if you publish a Power BI report to the web, anyone can view that and they can view it for free. And you can even do that if you yourself are a free user. In fact, publish to web last year became the only way that free users could share reports. Before, there used to be other options, but they limited that whenever they added Power BI Premium. They made a lot of changes to Power BI free edition. So publish to web, something to be aware of. This is called public embedding, which is not the same as Power BI embedded, which we'll talk about. You're making your data publicly available. Do not do not put any confidential information in any report that you're making publicly available. Now, you can later revoke the URL. You can say, oh, no, I made a mistake. But just be aware that anyone who has the URL has access to your data. Now, I've heard some people say, well, can I just use this method and then embed that into my SharePoint or something like that, and then I get the security? And it's technically that's kind of true, but not really. Because the thing is that you could have a disgruntled employee who takes that URL, leaves the organization, and they still have access to that data. And anyone who can get access to the URL or guess the URL or something like that has access to data. So, I mean, you can try a security by obscurity method, but I would not suggest it. Also, technically speaking, from some of the messages I saw whenever I was trying to do publish the web, it sounds like this is designed only for external use. So if you're trying to avoid licensing restrictions by using this internally, you might get in some trouble. Now, one of the things to be aware of is that you can disable this capability at the tenant level or at the security group level. So you can say, okay, only these people in these security groups can actually publish the web. And I recommend that anyone who administers Power BI within your organization, go take a look at the tenant settings, because there's a lot of settings with, can you print stuff? Can you export to Excel? Can you share the data? And so by default, anyone and their grandmother can publish to web, which means that you have this security risk, you have this exfiltration risk, that your data might end up leaving the organization. So you have to be incredibly careful and make sure that this is disabled. But let's say you decide, okay, we're a nonprofit, like the, I never get the name exactly right, but the Elizabeth Glacier Pediatric AIDS Foundation. They have a really great page where they show all the work that they're doing to reduce pediatric AIDS. And so they take advantage of the publish to web capability to do this, right? Looks great, and it's publicly available information, so there's no security risk there. Well, when you do that, what happens is you're given a URL, and then you're given an iframe, which is basically a web page within a web page, right? If you're not used to working with HTML or anything like that, it's basically it punches a hole in your web page to another web page. And you're given this, and you're told, hey, give this to your web administrator and just insert it, and now you have your report. So that's how it works. It's pretty simple to implement, but just please be aware of the security risks that are going on there. So the other way that we can share with the broader community, or not necessarily the broader community, but people outside of your organization at a broader scale, right, is Power BI embedded. And so if you want to implement this, you're going to need a web developer, because you're going to be writing JavaScript and that sort of thing. And it depends on premium capacity to run. Like I said, you're going to need your reports to be backed by premium capacity of some sort to be able to do this. It used to be, as I said before, all in Azure, and it used to be that you would pay by the render, which again was just not a very convenient model for just planning your billing cycles, I guess. Because you wouldn't know, am I going to get a bill for $100 this month or $1,000? And so last year they totally revamped it. And so now a lot of the same interface is going to be through PowerBI.com. And you're going to specify, instead of having a user go through PowerBI.com and log in through their Office 365 account, you have this custom security model where you're taking advantage of row level security, and you're specifying, okay, these roles can see this data. And then on your front end, with your web application, you're going to specify, okay, here's the role that you have. And so this can be a good way to handle multi-tenant solutions for a lot of different customers and that sort of thing. But talking about the premium capacity, like I said, there's 3 levels of premium capacity. So there's the P level, which is ideal for people who want to use PowerBI.com, and you have very, very large data sizes or large user bases, and that starts at $5,000 per month. The next level in between is the EM, which is for embedding, which specifically is for embedding, say, your intranet, and that starts at, actually, I forget off the top of my head now, but that's kind of mid-range. And then we've got the A-level SKUs, and there's, I want to say about 8 of them, and they cover the whole gamut. And so you can pay anywhere from $725 per month to $23,000, depending on how many renders you need, because it starts at 300 per hour all the way up to almost 10,000 renders per hour. And if you go down this route, in addition to having to write custom software and custom security, you're going to have to deal with application keys and all of this kind of stuff. So unless you're willing to make a significant investment in custom application development, this is not an ideal way for sharing with a large number of users. If you're an ISV, if you're an independent software vendor and you're writing your own software, then yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But for most of you, it's just not going to. So now I just want to take a couple minutes to recap, and then I'm going to talk about a resource to look at moving forward. So, so here to recap, we've flipped the pyramid back down, and we're going to start at the top. So when you're starting on that self-service side of things, you're really a lot of times going to either be sharing dashboards and now technically reports, or you're going to be sharing workspaces. So again, dashboards are going to be your best starting point because they're just so easy to jump into. So when you're still in the proof of concept stage, sharing dashboards or sharing reports makes a lot of sense. But long-term, you really don't want all your stuff to live in my workspace. If nothing else, as a consideration to your employees whenever you go to get a better job somewhere else. And so the next step up, but not nearly as well managed as some of these other things, is shared workspaces. So it's incredibly easy to create a workspace. Whenever you hit publish, you're able to decide, okay, which workspace am I going to publish to? And a workspace is, again, it's just a container. It's just a group and a container, and it says these people have access, and here's where we're going to store our data sets, our reports, and our dashboards. And so that's a little bit of a step up. It's a little bit more organized. And the nice thing too is that you can set other people to be admins. So whenever you win the lottery and you decide, okay, I'm not working in business intelligence anymore, your coworkers still have complete control. So these are the two starting points. And then at a certain point, what's going to happen is you're going to have to productionize things. Right? You're not going to be able to just do the self-service model anymore because you're going to need a single source of truth, or you're going to need something that's been approved, or there's going to be too many people making too many changes, and you're going to have to start locking things down a little bit. And so going down a level, when we get to that point, we're going to be using apps. Again, there's organizational content packs, but those have been deprecated. You should not be using organizational content packs unless you have a bunch of Power BI or a bunch of power users, pardon me, and you need to make sure that they have the ability to take a template and add their own reports or make their own changes or do a bunch of customizations. In general, if you need to deploy to the rest of all the other Power BI users, you want to use apps. It provides really great staging capabilities, publishing capabilities, and you can kind of wrap things up with a nice little bow, like I said. That's kind of going to, that should be your end goal in most cases, is you want to work your way to there. And so the two layers left for broader audiences are really much more edge cases. Most of you are never going to use any of these methods. Most of you are going to live in the top half of this pyramid. So going the next layer down, we've got Power BI Premium, Report Server, and SharePoint. So this is when you say, okay, yes, I've shared with other people who are maybe comfortable normally going with into PowerBI.com, and we either now need to find a way to license everybody, or we want to use our intranet and embed there. And so recapping, Power BI Premium, if you do not have 500 users, do not use Power BI Premium because it is expensive as heck. You're talking about $5,000 per month minimum to truly start with Power BI Premium and all of the features of the Power BI service. There are other cases, like I said, they've got a whole white paper. We're going to have a link in the next slide for where you can get these white papers, but they have a whole white paper about the capabilities of Power BI Premium. There's a number of things there currently, like you can have much more frequent refreshes of your data, and there's things that are coming in the roadmap. And so it's great if you need to be able to pin certain workspaces in memory for the best performance, if you have larger than a gig for your data set, just all these different things, but so expensive, Report server, also very expensive. Do not use report server unless your data has to live on premises. That is the primary use case. Again, there's other scenarios where it might make sense. Maybe you're just more comfortable controlling your own infrastructure, but from a capabilities standpoint, there's so many more things you can do with PowerBI.com. But that's also a way to license for your entire organization. And again, that is expensive because you think about it, Enterprise Edition with software assurance is incredibly expensive. I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars to be able to properly license that. Next to this level is we have SharePoint. So SharePoint is a nice happy medium. It's easy enough to set up. You're deploying individual reports to pages on SharePoint. In the licensing store, you have two options, which is nice. You can either license everyone who wants to see the reports, and so now they don't have to go into PowerBI.com. If they're used to SharePoint, this is a good solution. Or you can use the EM product SKU, and so now you don't get all of the premium capabilities for PowerBI.com, but you at least don't have to license people to view the reports in SharePoint. So those are some more edge case, some more weird kind of situations. But if you need to reach the entire organization, those can be ways to do it. Again, this makes sense when you're talking about hundreds of users. And then finally, at the very bottom of the pyramid, when you need to just shout from the rooftops, here's my report, do what you want, have at it. We've got Power BI Embedded, which is designed for applications. Now, this can be used for internal applications as well. You could have some sort of private application and do reporting this way. But just remember, there is a certain amount of cost you're going to have to support for all those renders. So it may not make a lot of sense, and you're still going to have to do a bunch of JavaScript coding to get everything working. So really take that with a grain of salt. But if you've got, if you're a software vendor or if you're creating some sort of external application, Power BI Embedded makes a lot of sense. And then finally, publish to web. If you don't mind everyone and their grandmother having access to the underlying data, then go ahead and use publish to web. It's great for nonprofits. It's great for organizations that want to report out on some of their metrics and things, but just be careful about it because everyone has access to the data the moment you hit publish. So these are all the different ways to publish Power BI reports. And you can see they kind of fit in this logical hierarchy depending on how many users we want to support. Two other things that I want to mention. So one is you may be saying, okay, what next? There's a lot of information. I'm trying to, let it all sink in a little bit. What do I do next? So if you go to docs.microsoft.com/n-us/power-bi/white papers, or if you just Google Power BI white papers, they've got a whole bunch of white papers on different pieces of Power BI. So they've got stuff on Azure Active Directory business to business, if you want to share with external users. They've got stuff on Power BI Premium. They've got stuff on just general IT governance. And then the one here, which was written by Chris Webb and Melissa Coates, is on different deployment methods. And so it's a little bit small, but you can see how they talk about, okay, if you've got individual users, if you've got a small group, if you want to share with the whole organization, you want to share with people outside, here's different ways of approaching that, right? And so it's a very, very comprehensive document for different ways that you can go ahead and deploy your reports out to the broader organization. In a little bit, we're going to have time for questions. One other thing, since we do have time, I do want to mention, please consider filling out the past content survey. This group is supported by PASS as an organization, and you can win free admission to PASS Summit. It closes in about a week, and it's going to help the team there have an idea of what content you want to see at PASS Summit. So if you want to see more Power BI content, fill out the survey and let them know. So please definitely consider that. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to thank everyone for attending, and now we've got some time for some questions. It looks like we might have some questions. Oh, actually no, it looks like we have a white paper. If anyone has any questions, I think you should be able to put them into the chat window.
Yeah. Eugene, can you see the questions window?
I see. Let me see if I can find it. I see the chat, but I don't think I see the
polls tools and handouts and everything is?
No, I don't think I'm
Okay.
seeing it. I see the chat and I just see the link to the white papers.
Okay. I'll
Um,
pick out a handful and then
yeah,
we can
please
start
do.
answering them. Okay.
Yep, perfect.
I guess one of them would be using SharePoint. Can you put content for multiple workspaces on a single page?
Um, yeah, so that's a good question. So as far as I'm aware, you can, but it might look a little bit ugly because what happens is that you're basically adding in a web part. And even though I haven't tried it myself, you can have as many web parts on a page as you want. The thing though is that it's going to take up the whole horizontal space of that page. So your users might have to scroll down a bunch, but whenever you do it, you're basically just saying, you add the web part, you give it the report URL, and it doesn't care what workspace it's from at that point. So you most certainly can have one page with a bunch of different reports from different workspaces. Absolutely.
All right. Next question. Can Power BI be used to do the traditional tabular reports like SSRS for things like an invoice, items in a shopping cart, etc.? If
Sure.
so, can it be embedded into an ASP.NET core web application? Do you still have to publish to a dashboard to do tabular reports?
Right. Um, so yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to be brutally honest. Power BI, it's great at a lot of things. Detail heavy, pixel perfect tabular reporting is one of its weak spots, right? So if you're trying to create something that you know um, like an operational report, something that you would email to a customer or what have you, Power BI is really not suited for that. It can do it. It has supports for grid view, for matrix view, but the problem is just that the way that it's designed, just from a visual perspective, a data layout perspective, is designed for analytical reporting, which means that you're doing aggregations and filtering very commonly, and a lot of interactive clicking around, that sort of thing, to slice and dice. Now, the Power BI embedded piece, that's just JavaScript when you get down to it, right? There's some other bits and pieces, but for the most part, you're working with JavaScript on the front end. So can you put that in ASP.NET Core? Sure. I mean, you definitely have support for JavaScript there. But yeah, would I use this for like a shopping cart or something like that? Absolutely not. There's ways to do it, but that's definitely not what it's designed for. Things like SSRS or Crystal Reports are designed for kind of more of that pixel perfect, detail heavy, tabular heavy, operational reporting where you have to get it exactly right. Because like no one wants a customer being mad because their shopping cart changed size or there's some change in filtering or what have you. You really want to make sure that it always looks exactly the same, no matter the situation. Power BI just really wasn't intended for that. It was intended for, the management report for your C-level suite. They just want to view on one screen the company as a whole. Definitely was not designed for, say, a shopping cart or invoices or anything like that.
All right. If you have a Power BI Pro and SharePoint, do you have to have Office 365?
That's a good question. So, I forget, it gets a little bit nuanced there. So I'm trying to remember the exact details off of my head, right? So to be able to view the Power BI piece, you need a Power BI Pro license, which is $10 per month per user. You can get that license independent of Office 365. So you can have it so that you have a user in like Azure Active Directory or what have you, or an Office 365 user, but you haven't assigned them an Office 365 SKU because there's the E1, the E3, and the E5. And those are the things that basically give you email and Microsoft Office, right? Power BI is included in the E5 level. Now, so the immediate answer is no, you don't need Office 365 licensing to do that. You might still need an Office 365 account technically. I think you might be able to get away with just an Azure Active Directory one. But here's the challenge. They at least need to be licensed to be able to view SharePoint Online, right? So this is for SharePoint Online, just to clarify. And so what I don't know off the top of my head is what's the licensing story for accessing SharePoint online without paying for an Office 365 license, because normally the SharePoint's just rolled into that. So that's the big question there. But yeah, technically speaking, you shouldn't need to pay for, say, Microsoft Office for someone to be able to view an embedded SharePoint online report in terms of the Power BI piece.
While we're at the Office 365, the next one would be what are the security considerations for sharing via Office 365?
Yeah, and so just for clarification, I'm going to assume that when we talk about sharing through Office 365, we're talking about SharePoint embedding, right? So I'm fairly certain that, truthfully, I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check. What I believe how it works is that the security is still managed through PowerBI.com, right? I'm pretty sure that you still have to say, okay, they have access to this report or this workspace or something like that. But I've never actually tested it yet to see, okay, if I embed into SharePoint, can I just, if I embed into SharePoint, can any Joe Schmo who has access to that SharePoint page have access to the report? So I would definitely have to check that out. So I'm not 100% sure. Something else to take into consideration is PowerBI.com, as well as SAS, if you're connecting directly to that, has support for row-level security. And so something you definitely may want to consider is that if you are sharing to your broader organization like that, do I want to make it so that everyone has access to the report, but they can only see certain pieces of the data? So that's definitely an option. But yeah, think about it. I don't know off the top of my head, whenever you embed into SharePoint, does it still respect the Power BI security that's been set up? I'm pretty sure it does, but I'd have to test that.
All right, let's do like 2 more questions since we're getting
Perfect.
close to time.
Perfect.
Also, Eugene, a lot of people are asking if you can share your PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, definitely. I will. So if you go to SQLgene.com, I will make a post and I will put the slides up. I will do that by the end of the night tonight. I'll also see if I can follow up some of these questions there as well when I get a chance to look at them. But yeah, just go to SQLgene.com tomorrow, and I'll make sure that the slides are there by the end of tonight.
Also, everyone, every webinar is recorded and we upload it to our YouTube channel, which you can find the link for on bi.pass.org. So you guys
and I'll
can
make sure we get a link on the YouTube side back to the slides, so you'll be able to find them that way as well.
Alrighty. Okay, let's start off 2 more questions.
Yep, perfect.
Can premium users who aren't classified as pro, regardless of how frequently they access reports and dashboards, export the underlying data to Excel?
So, I believe so. I'd have to check on that. So from everything that I've seen, if you're a free user and your reports are supported by premium, then for any of those reports, it's as if you're a pro user. So every time I see something about this, it seems like if it's backed by premium, it doesn't matter what licensing you have, you get all of the support. If you're a personal edition, free edition user, and you're looking at non-premium reports, you're looking at just stuff that you made, then you probably can't do the export. But from what every time I see something about it, if it's backed by premium, you should have the same exact capabilities as you would if you were pro licensed. That's from everything I've seen, but I'd have to double check on that specific piece.
Alrighty. And the last question would be, are there any good training resources and example applications based on Power BI embedded? And does it work with ASP.NET Core?
Right. So I know that there's, if I remember, there should be some GitHub samples available. If you just look into the documentation on Power BI Embedded, they have a number of resources there. And if I remember, they have pretty strong support on GitHub. It's been a while since I've looked into it personally. As far as example sort of scenarios. I haven't seen a lot on there. Usually for most people, they have a pressing need, and so Power BI Embedded kind of slotted into that pretty easily. And again, you're going to be paying for use, or not usage, but capacity. Pardon me. And so a lot of people don't really consider making that jump unless they really know that they need it. But I'll see if I can find some stuff. And again, I'll create a blog post tonight and try to get that updated. So again, just go to sqlgene.com tomorrow, and there should be a blog post there with slides and some updated answers. So thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for jumping on and joining the webinar. Eugene, thank you for hosting.
Yeah, definitely.
Presenting.
Jason, sorry.
Yes.
Before you close everything out, if you could email me the questions, if you get a chance to do it, that'd be fantastic, and I'll write some follow-ups for them. Perfect.
I'm trying to take a screenshot of them real quick and then send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And please check on the bi.pass.org for our future webinars and also the YouTube link to view the previous webinars we've hosted. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.